Wait, it's twirling. Okay, it's here. Hello and welcome everybody. How y'all doing? I am Dr. Alicia, and this is Healing Conversations. Oh my goodness, tonight we are going to dive into a topic I really enjoy exploring. And to me, it's like it's layered. And I personally think it's an urgent topic because today we're going to talk about many different things, but most important, we're going to talk about are sports racist toward Black women? And what does that mean for their mental health, their money, their ability to thrive on and off the field? But as a Black woman viewing this, it has an impact on me because I identify, of course, with these images that are so near and dear to my heart. And we've seen it recently how athletes, Black female athletes, sometimes struggle in their sport, but they also struggle outside of their sport. So one example that just came up was the issue with Sha'Carri Richardson, how she did not perform very well, and she's a little up and down. We just had the World Championships and looked like she is the one in charge. She's reclaimed her throne. And but she struggled off the track because my husband and I, Dr. Boyce, we talked a little bit about on this very platform. We talked a little bit about how she struggles with this domestic violence incident in the airport following a loss. And I kept thinking, wow, I wonder, Johnathane, by the way, I was thinking about you when it happened because I was like, wait, is it that some of her relationship issues carried over into the track and then therefore she didn't do very well? I don't know. We'll talk about those.
I'm glad you framed that. Yes.
You got something to say? What's up?
Yeah. So I think that's an important topic, and we'll jump into that.
Yes. And then, of course, I'm in Chicago, so I'm following Angel Reese. She gets backlash from the WNBA, some comments that were made that was a little insensitive, but I think it was taken out of context. Then we have the US Open. We got the tennis happening. It was a fashion event, but Taylor Townsend, this whole issue on the court with her, and also a bunch of other tennis Black women who are just making tennis exciting right now. But off the court, they're getting these comments. You look at judges, all of this is happening. Seems like it's all coming together. And their stories, to me, is not just about sports. It's watching this as a reflection of what happens in my personal life and what I see all around. These are stories about, to me, resilience, how to deal with pressure, the racism, the sexism. Yes, sexism. And, I do want to have a conversation about healing and going forward. But before we do that, I got to introduce y'all because we are welcoming back Johnathane Gaffney Sr. Okay. He is Coach Gaffney. And I'm looking here, you got 20 years of experience working with youth, families, athletes, all around mental health and community engagement. And I really love this. And then one day, I'm looking at my husband right now, my husband, Dr. Boyce Watkins. Y'all know who he is, CEO of the Black Business School. He's a finance professor. He is a lifelong sports enthusiast. Whenever we get alone together, he will talk about sports and he'll do it in a way that is romantic, believe it or not. But he's going to help us unpack some of this media narratives that I think impact the treatment of Black women athletes. I see him around the corner, so he'll be joining us in a second. Okay, so tonight we are exposing some of the issues. We are going to talk about healing. I, of course, want to talk about mindfulness in sports. And I was reading up. I didn't get to tell you anything, Coach Gaffney. I was reading up on this topic and I realized mindfulness is a really key concept that is taught to professional athletes as well as youth athletes. So we'll kind of dig into some of that. as well. Okay, so this is a conversation about sports. It's also about life. We all can see ourselves reflected in this. And of course, it always gets me upset. Anyway, so let's get into our first question. Jonathan, I really want you to talk to us about what you see as Black women in sports. Both of us have daughters who play sports. So we've been talking about dance and sports. And, how is it that Black women in sports often face this racism, sexism, all of this at the same time, and just the pressures and how it affects their ability to stay focused in the competition? What do you have to say to that?
So first off, I would be remiss if I did not say thank you so much for inviting me again. I'm so
Yes.
excited to be here. As you stated before, my experience really speaks from a place as a teacher and a coach. And 3 years ago, after experiencing so many different things from so many different perspectives related to mental health and athletes, I went on this journey to start to understand everything that I possibly could about this subject. And so my business actually started 3 years ago, but the work started 10 years ago as I worked through various things with dealing with parents and athletes and performance and things of that sort. So I really focused a lot of my attention on that 7th through 12th grade because those are foundational principles. For example, when you start talking about algebraic expressions in math, you first got to go back to understanding numbers. And so when we start talking about this ideal of mindfulness or mental health in athletics, I think it's really important to backtrack and start building some vocabulary around what that really is and what we're talking about when we're talking about emotional intelligence or regulation or identity or some of those words that are key buzzwords. So that's where we'll start and frame our conversation from. As it relates to just people in general, I think that there is more work to be done to humanize athletes as people. For a lot of our culture, because of the esteem that athletes are put on, and that esteem comes with pressure, we often lose that player-person relationship, and we only look at those individuals as players or objects, and not as people that are comprehensive in nature. So some of the things that we're talking about today are that comprehensive nature of people who participate in athletics. So instead of calling them athletes, I say people who participate in athletics. Yes, they're athletes, yes. But just as you would respect a person who had a diagnosis of autism, you would not say an autistic person, you would say a person with autism. So the same can be applied in this scenario when we talk about people who participate in athletics, also known as athletes.
This is really interesting. Person first language is so important because they're more than just that sport that they happen to play in. And gosh, as you were talking, it just reminded me this weekend I had date night with Dr. Boyce and we watched him. And
Ooh.
I thought that movie was so good, but it also perpetuates because in that movie, there's a lot to be said about that movie, but I mean, he was it was nothing but football for him. Nothing but football. Like that was his life, his entire, all his free, that whole movie. I don't want to spoil it for people. It was like eating, sleeping, drinking, everything football. And there was nothing else. And it was almost to the point of, and maybe that's the point of, I don't know if Jordan Peele did the movie or who else wrote the film, but it was really too extreme, like extreme sports. But yeah, I think that's really kind of interesting how the balance is not there. And how movies like this tells us about how extreme things can be, but bringing it back to when you were talking about mental health and staying focused, what is it in terms of off pressure, especially for Black women in light of all of these things that are happening? How is that, the pressure. What is that in terms of how it looks for Black women, especially mothers, and all of these multiple different roles that they're carrying? What does that mean for them?
Sure. So it starts with, I'm glad you said something that I'm going to recapture in extremes. I think that in anything, there's a possibility for extremes. And so when you're talking about being person centered and talking about being a comprehensive person, we all have various layers of us as people. And so the very first layer is what our needs are as human beings.
Mm.
um, Dr. Karen Purvis out of the Childhood Institute in TCU, which is Texas Christian University out here in Texas, which is where I'm from. Shout out Texas. She says that there are two things that every human needs: is love, that connection piece, and belonging, that community piece. So we need connection and community. And so oftentimes we get into these sports, we get into these different endeavors, and we still carry those needs for connection and community. You then start tying that to identity. And the extreme of that is I am only an athlete. I eat, breathe, and sleep football. I eat, breathe, and sleep basketball. I eat, breathe, and sleep, whatever that sport is, and that becomes your identity, and that becomes associated with your personality. So where it starts is disassociating the ideal of you are only an athlete, because you can be a mom, you're also a sister, you're also a auntie, you're also a you also have these skills and abilities. So it's really helping athletes understand that being an athlete is one part of what they do. It's not who they are.
I like that because I'm thinking about Shelly Ann Fraser Price, who in the world competition, we got to see her run her last race. And I'm in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh, she can go home and be a wife and be a mother, and she could, do some of these other things. Of course, still be interested in track, but I see her as such a complete person. But I really don't see her as demonized in the same sense that I see a lot of African American women in sports. And I just think about some of the pressures that they're under, because all of us, we don't really get to see some of these things. And Shelly Ann Fraser Price had a beautiful career. And it's really nice to see her kind of end her career on the up note, because she didn't win anything, but she ran a great race. And the Jamaicans came in second in I think the 4x100. I was kind of listening to it because my husband, he'll be coming in shortly, but he's an enthusiast in track, so I can't help but to realize this. But I just was looking at sort of like the way people look at women, particularly how a lot of Black women who want to become mothers, how they are, seen in sports.
Yes, I agree. With anything, I think that it's important to, and this is something, again, being a high school teacher, an educator, my brain works in that framework. So forgive me if this is something that the approach is kind of dumbed down, but it's this
Yeah.
ideal of when we talk about messaging in English class and talking about persuasive arguments and persuasive speech, the whole ideal of that unit is to talk about how messaging carries a meaning. There is meaning
Mhm.
behind the or projection of messaging. So when you're talking about how media can play a part in um, how they paint a picture to look, I think that's the same thing in how we as individuals
Mhm.
talk. We're given a perspective right now about these young ladies' lives, but we're giving it from a limited viewpoint. We don't see all of the aspects of their lives. So instead of taking it as true face value, true 100% accuracy, I think that we should do a better job as individuals that are consuming this information and being able to look at multiple perspectives, be able to see sources from multiple perspectives, and not just say and ask really the question, who or what is the meaning behind the message I'm receiving? Why is this person framing this message in this way? For example, why is Coach Gaffney on this podcast right now with Dr. Alicia? Well, I
Mm-hmm.
want it to be normalized. I have an agenda. Yes, my messaging has an agenda. I want the conversation
Mm-hmm.
about athletics and mental health to be normalized. I want it to be started at a foundational perspective. So as I speak, I'm going to speak with that agenda in mind. And some of the messaging that we see, have we seen historically, that we've seen, and not only just in the context of sports, but in every context, in film, in television, in all of those different things. We can point to racist practices, sexism, colorism. We can point to a number of those isms in all of that. But you got to remember that not everything that you see is 100% accuracy or the truth. So do a little bit like one of my son's favorite songs was in elementary school. Dig a little deeper.
Oh my
Dig a little
God.
deeper. And
I
if
love
you
this dig a little deeper
find out
because
more, dig a little deeper.
yeah, because I think like most people don't dig deeper. They just like follow whatever is there. And it's like if you want to be an athlete, it's more than just the sport. You have to manage your social media. You have to manage these narratives that are said about you. And you have to be able to cancel all of that out. When it's time for game time, when it's time to go, you have to be completely focused on the here and now. And I will get into mindfulness and how that can kind of help people block some of that out. But we have here our guest. Let me see, Dr. Boyce here. I'm going to bring him on because I'm going to add him here because, hey, Dr. Boyce, how you doing?
Hey,
Um,
how are y'all doing today?
we're doing
Doing
great.
well.
We are sitting here talking about, let me tell you what we've been talking about. Everybody, we've been talking about our sports races toward Black women. We've been talking about the media narratives. We've been talking a little bit about mental health. We haven't quite gotten into that, but this is the question that we're talking about. And I'm glad to bring you on here. And I want to let everybody know that let's see. What is happening? Where's my banners? Okay. So as I peel through my banners, I want everybody, if you're interested, text love, LOVE to 87948 to get updates from me. I would like for you guys on Sunday night, we've been talking about mindfulness in relationships. We are going to talk about mindfulness today, but go to draliciabookclub.com. It's totally free. You can join me on Sunday night. We talk about healthy relationships and how, what did you say? Jonathan, our guest here, he talked about emotional intelligence. I definitely want to talk about that today because we have seen some athletes when they get into this state where they're reactive, what happens, particularly with Sha'Carri Richardson and her domestic violence incident in the airport. And then, of course, if you're interested in working with me, you can go to coachingwithdralicia.com. Okay, Boyce. What you got? So that's what we've been kind of talking about. What are your and I also talked about how we saw that movie Him this weekend. We had our date night this weekend and we saw Him and how fascinating that was and how that is like sports to the extreme.
Yeah,
You can comment on whatever you
yeah,
want to comment
him
on.
was really good. And how you doing, brother? Good to see you, man.
Same
Um,
here.
yeah, absolutely. Well, him was interesting because it was really a good job in terms of really showing the trade-off that we make when we become extreme about anything. And in sports, there's something about the culture of sports in terms of I know when I played sports, there's an appeal of kind of the warrior culture and being a warrior and a winner and a champion and everything else, which pretty much tells you that you can't give enough to win, that the more you're willing to sacrifice, the greater you can become. And so when you're using terms like sacrifice and And in the movie, they used terms like savior, and his favorite team was the Saints. Was it or the Saviors? They were the Saviors, and his father would tell him about the importance of sacrifice. All that I think spins back into almost like a religious sort of thing, almost like the sport becomes your God, and you're sort of praying at this altar to give everything and sacrifice everything to get this championship or whatever it is you're trying to get. And it becomes really insidious, I think, for Black men, because there's so many men who sacrifice everything to try to win at a sport. And the cost, you get to the point where you experience what is called the winner's curse, which is that the price you paid to get that championship is far higher than what you actually got. And I think about that a lot when I look at a lot of these NFL players that won Super Bowls, but they got brain damage. Life after the age of 40 is terrible for some of these guys. A lot of them have a lot of problems that you can accumulate if you get swept away in the culture, whether you're talking about going broke, babies, mamas, pill addictions to painkillers, things like that. And I think that what we got to really talk about is just balance. And I think balance comes into play when you also think about self-worth. So I heard I was listening to y'all talk while I was eating my food. I just finished doing something, so I was real hungry, but I was listening. And I like when you were talking about identity and how identity, and I think Jonathan, you mentioned community and the need to be connected and how important that is. So if you're connected to a community that also possesses your identity, then you're giving a lot of power over to people that can manipulate you, especially when you're young. Last thing I'll say on this that I thought about when you said that, Jonathan, is I remember when I used to work in the basketball players' dorm at the University of Kentucky when I was in college. And the basketball players, I mean, those were the big men on campus. They had all the girls, all the fame, all the money, everything else. And I mean, I remember everybody would have to sign in at the front desk to go see the player. And I would literally see one guy have 4 beautiful women sign in and come out like a little assembly line. And the thing about that experience, though, is I remember also walking in that dorm and the way they indoctrinated them into the culture of winning in sports. Everything, all the murals on the wall of previous championships, and everything was, if in the football dorm it was football, and the basketball dorm it was basketball. And then you have to ask that question, what happens when you lose football, or what happens when you lose the ability to play basketball? It seems very dangerous, because for some people they lose their whole identity. I'm done talking. Thank you for letting me.
Yeah. No, I think this is really good. I mean, what are they sacrificing? Their bodies. They're sacrificing their brains. I mean, even in the movie Him, the guy had this big metal, looked like metal staples in his head. And I mean, he was sacrificing his health just so that he can really get validation externally. And to some extent, you're sacrificing your family. I mean, just everything. So
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, he did what? What were you going to say?
I was going to say you sacrifice your soul.
Yeah, he was.
That's why the religious reference for him was so appropriate, because you think about this, when you dedicate your whole life to a sport, and then that sport gets taken away and you lose your sense of purpose, you effectively you're in danger of becoming a soulless person, where you're just like, I have no sense of purpose. I have no reason to get out of bed anymore. So now, instead of finding out who I am and doing all these other great things I could be doing, maybe I sit at home in bed and drink all day and smoke and take pills or whatever, because I have nothing to do now. So to me, I see that as when someone takes your identity and your sense of purpose, that's about as close to stealing your soul as people can come, in my view.
Oh, that's so true. I remember, I'll have you comment, Jonathan, but I just want to say that it was funny. It's about 7 days. So the movie Him. Okay, everybody in the chat, let us know, everybody who's here, let us know if you saw the movie Him. And I'm sorry, I don't want to give it away, but by day 2, I remember looking at Boyce in the movie theater, and I'd be like, it ain't worth it for me. I'd be out of there. By that second day, I would have been gone. I never would have seen him. By the way, it's about different days. Day 1 or 2, I would have been like, this is creepy. I'm done. Like, there's no way I'm coming back. I'm quitting football. So that would have been me. But you
don't like football, and you're not you've never been like a high testosterone male who wanted to achieve that. I would have stayed till probably day 8.
No, you would not have.
Yeah,
You
I would
would
have
not.
stayed. I would have went through all the things, but
Day 2, you would have gone. That was crazy.
It's an 18-year-old, because that's what I had to do. That's what I don't know, Jonathan. I want to hear you, man, because
Yeah,
I
let's
feel
do it.
I feel like as a young man who wants to be somebody in the world, you want to accomplish something. You want to win a championship, whatever that means, and I think that that's okay. But I think it's important for athletes to just know you may not win the championship in football or basketball, but you can win it in business. You can win it in law. And I think that it is kind of fun to go for what you want. But if you go too far, you lose that balance. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Yes. So I think that you all bring up some very interesting points. One that I want to recapture is this ideal of extremes. And so, Dr. Boyce, you said something about extreme earlier and how you can go to the extreme. I want people to understand that there are extremes in everything in life that we can go. We can have an extreme love for something that completely captivates our attention, and all we want to do is work with that one thing. There can be an extreme participation in gaming, where someone sits at a computer and plays video games for endless of hours and becomes consumed by that thing. There can actually be an extreme and an over extreme of how we do relationship, where we are so engulfed with that person that we don't know ourselves away from them or apart from them. We don't know the things we like. We only like a Coming to America. I'm gonna use that reference where the young lady comes out and he's like, well, what do you like to do? And she's like, whatever you like. So extremes can exist in anything. So let's, I think, doing a justice of talking to the point of, when we're talking about athletes specifically, there is a level of dedication that is required at each level that you progress at. And understanding what that is going to entail is important. It's kind of one of those things where when you go before you get married and someone says, okay, in your marriage, you're going to have conversations about how you're going to rear kids. If no one ever talks to you about that and you get to that position, then you're stuck in a point where you're having to go on prior knowledge, maybe some misinformation, all of these things to make a decision. And so I think that as we talk about this, framing this from a perspective of these are things that athletes are experiencing as a athlete trying to get into this culture of athletics. What is that going to look like? What does that involve? How do I navigate those things? How do I become a comprehensive person so I don't lose the balance where people are screaming my name and cheering for me one day, and then in the comments they're going crazy the next week? Because how do I keep that balance of not getting too high with the highs or too low with the lows? So that's where I think the framing of the conversation is important. The second thing that I would like to mention is that I think there's a progression about understanding the business of sports and sports business. So there's a business of athletics, and then there is the athletic business. Athletic business are the concept of what are the things that I have to do to become a marketable product, and understand that the higher level I go, the more of a product I become. So middle school football player versus a college football player has to approach that differently mindset wise, because understanding that environment from a collegiate standpoint is different than a middle school standpoint. That's what I mean by that. But then there's the sports business where you're having to talk about marketing and generating product and generating revenue and all those things. Dr. Boyce, you know way more than I do about it, but I do understand that you as the athlete are a part of that circus of that sports business. And you as the athlete must understand how you play a part in that, so that, in the words of someone I heard say, don't play the game and don't let the game play you.
Well, sports is definitely a business, and I think and that's what I would say to athletes is that you can learn business too. You don't have to just be a product or a commodity of somebody else. Like, I think one of the worst things about sports for Black people is, as good as we are at sports and as much money that's made from our talent, we should have another 5 million millionaire Black families out here because we're bringing the talent to the table, right? But the lack of understanding of business and the lack of balance, like committing everything to playing the sport and not playing the bigger game, the game of ownership, has really cost us dearly and led us to be subjects of somebody else's choices. And so really, I think that sports are fun. I think life is a sport sometimes. I mean, if you want to look at it that way, it's competitive and every, all of us, I would say are, I know I just met you today, Jonathan, but I know that my wife is super competitive, she's an extremist in her own right. It took extreme behavior for her to get that PhD. Every other black student got kicked out except for her. She also she's 51. She wears the same dress that size she wore when she was 22. That takes extreme behavior. Average people can't do that. Same thing with myself, right? So I think excellence in itself becomes extreme to the point where it's okay to accept sometimes if you're a little off balance. Like you say, I want this so bad that I'm gonna sacrifice heavily to obtain it. But I think I would encourage everybody to remember sacrificing everything is usually going to lead to a lot of regrets. And then also everything great in your life has a price to it. And what I see a lot of times is people, when in that movie they point this out when they asked the guy, they said, how much are you willing to sacrifice to be great? He said, I'll sacrifice everything. That's a terrible answer because everything is a big price. Like if I say I'll give everything I've got, I'll give up my family, I'll give up my health, I'll disable myself if I have to. Like I'll literally cut off Ronnie Lott, the football player, cut off the tip of his pinky just so he could finish a game, right? And so I think it's in life in general, the way you can have that balance while still being as excellent as you want to be is you got to look at everything you choose to do and say, okay, there's a big price to do that. And then ask yourself, honestly, am I willing to pay the price? If you're willing to pay the price, you can have whatever you want. But then sometimes you can say, I really want that, but I'm not willing to go that far for that. And I don't know if we have enough of those conversations with ourselves.
Oh my goodness, willing to sacrifice all of that. That's interesting in how people look at that. They respect that. They go, oh, he's good. People cheer that along, that self-sacrifice, literally self-sacrifice. People cheer it along and they admire, they show admiration to people who are willing to do any and everything just to have that big W. Hey, everybody, we're almost at the top of the hour. And I just want to say we are talking about Black women, but we are talking about Black women and racism, sexism in sports and how it affects our mental health. It affects me just watching how Black women are treated in sports. It just affects me because I identify with them. And so even though it's, I will say I did play volleyball back in my day. We were undefeated for a while there. So we were a beast on the volleyball court. But all that aside, I didn't have to sacrifice anything to do that. But still, even when I was in junior high, there were people, we played against these white teams, because of course I'm from Gary, Indiana. We played against these white teams and we could feel the racism with the referees and these bad calls. So what I went through in elementary school is what we see in high school, college, professional sports. We see it in tennis, the US Open. We see all of these things. And Boyce, you brought up something that I didn't even think about, is ownership of these teams. Somehow Black people are just X'd out of ownership in a lot of things and not even allowed. If I got my money is just as green as the next person, why can't I buy a league or a team and have part of this ownership? What's going on here? Let's talk about racism. How do you think racism plays a part in some of this? And Jonathan, you can take that.
I'll let Jonathan take it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So because we live in the contexts and climates that we live in, that has always existed and will always exist. Because it's created, if you look at it from a sociological standpoint, and then compare it to a sports perspective, if I have an advantage over a team, I'm not going to surrender that advantage because it allows me to win. Or it gives me the ability to possibly win. So I think that's an ideology that we will always face. We as Black people, we as people who are in these various spheres that somewhat were created with tops on them, that were created with layers, that were created with pockets already sewn into the pants. And so I think um, the brilliance of that is that we find a way, and we found a way to continue to lift our voice in those different areas, whether it be politics, whether it be economics, like you do, Dr. Boyce, and finding those champions that says that, hey, this is something that we can do. This is something, having those forerunners, having those individuals that continue to say that you are not, your identity is not tied to your skin color only. Your identity can be tied to the gifts and talents that you were blessed with. Your identity can also be tied to the amount of value you provide to a community or to a ecosystem. All of these things can be value added. So when we talk about racism in sports, yes, it plays a part at every level and everything. However, I think that some of that focus can be shifted to the individuals that do work hard to overcome some of those things. Some of those people who bring to light some of, like, for example, I know a couple of years ago, there was a big push by several outlets. One of them is called the Pivot Podcast, where they brought several Black coaches from the NFL in and talking about why aren't there more Black head coaches? And because of that
Yeah.
conversation, other conversations started to happen where now there have been some doors open, not all the doors, and not as many doors there should be. And we can say that about any industry. We can say that about every industry, but we do see the progress. And so I encourage those individuals to continue to have the conversations that says that equality or racism is this and the system does that. But I also want to champion those individuals who are saying, I'm going to lead the way in making sure that I am the bridge to the access. I'm the person who stepped on this side and said, hey, this is what you can be. These are things, and that's what we need more of, I think. I think we need more people who are willing to be community minded, that have the experiences. I only have a certain amount of experience when it comes to sports. Another person may have a certain amount of experience, but collectively, can we bring those voices in the room and start setting a pathway for other generations to do it better? For example, one of the things recently we've seen in NIL deals with a young lady who went to Texas Tech, I believe.
Yes.
Uh, she got paid $1 million to go to Texas Tech. Yes, I agree. Is she worth 10 million? Probably. But 5 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. So
Yeah.
acknowledging the waves of what has happened, what has transpired, and continuing to beat that drum of let's keep moving, let's keep moving, let's keep moving.
Yeah, I think this is good. Paying college athletes, that's definitely progress, especially basketball players and football players. You know, paying athletes, definitely having more diverse coaches is definitely an answer. But I always thought to myself, and Boyce, you can comment on this, like, why can't all the players just get together and just be like, I quit? Just like walk off the field, because it would be no game. If the Black people just got up one day and was just like, I'm not doing it anymore, and they just left, I mean, what's gonna happen? Like, the whole thing is gonna collapse. Like, I just feel like Black athletes have the world in the palm of their hands. And why can't they just get together and do something? I don't know. It's more than just paying athletes and the coaches. I just am so frustrated because they dominate in so many of these areas and they see the racism. Just say, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to go over here. We all going to go over here. We're going to play over here. And then I bet you things will turn around. Boyce, what do you think?
Well, when you have conversations about doors being opened, what's interesting to me about those conversations is I don't think we ask the most important question that can be asked, which is who built the door? And why do I think Alicia knocked herself out of the room for a second. Who built the door? You know, who decided that there's going to be a door? Who decided who's going to get to walk through it? And why is that? Why do they control the door and we don't, right? And so what I'm really finding is that when you look at the racism in sports, a lot of that racism is driven largely by the fact that we are deeply committed to making sure the white man's businesses are really successful. We really are in love with white people's wealth in terms of allowing them to drive the car, and we just want to be a passenger. And so what I'm gonna say on that is that if you think about it like this, right? Think about how you're raised. You're raised to believe that there are a few things that you have to do to be successful, and some things are optional. So one thing you're told you have to do is one, you got to get an education. If you got a good family, they're like, go to school, go to school, go to school. And that's important for sure. That'll get you an education. Then when you get a job, you're told go to work. You don't work, you don't eat. You know, be a hardworking person, show up to work every day. That's not optional. You ask people about work, or what they're gonna do that day. They say, I gotta go work. I gotta go to work. But then when you get to things like investing, well, that becomes optional, right? You know, I can't invest because I don't have enough money. I don't know what to do. I got to think about it. You know, I'm a little nervous, right? And that really comes from training. Why is that important? Well, because going to school will get you an education. Working will pay your bills, but investing is what you do to build wealth. Investing is what you do to build power. Investing is what you must do to become an owner of anything. Jerry Jones, you know, he didn't spend his life trying to be a Dallas Cowboy on the field. He wanted to be in the owner's box, which required him to have a whole different mindset when it came to figuring out a way to acquire the Dallas Cowboys. Now, a lot of people couldn't have done what he did. It cost a lot of money. But then I know a lot of folks who are in an economic position where they could do exactly what Jerry Jones did, buy this team for 150 million and then hold it until it becomes worth 13 billion and deal with all the ups and downs that come with that. We've got athletes that are worth, LeBron is a billionaire. When you're a billionaire, you can do a lot of stuff. And the other thing too is, if you look at Jerry Jones, for example, just because I was watching his documentary, or the Cowboys documentary on Netflix, if you look at that, it took 30 years of consistent commitment and investment into the same organization to take that low value asset and make it into a high value asset, right? And so he didn't come in and try to buy the Cowboys at $13 billion. He bought the Cowboys at 150 million and increased the value to make it worth 13 billion. So for a lot of our athletes, a couple things that happened that I wish they would reconsider is, number one, they never actually, there's not a collective effort where everybody says, okay, what does it really take to be able to own this damn thing? How do we get together and buy some of this and own it? The other thing I would like to change is I would like for them to stop thinking that the way to ownership is to go buy something that's really valuable and get your little piece. Like, so rather than going out and busting your ass to own 3% of the freaking Miami Dolphins, go start the Negro Leagues and pour into that thing until it becomes worth something. That's how you build wealth. That's what the NFL owners did. Most of those families have owned their teams since they were created, and they were worth, the Chicago Bears were worth $50 when that Hallis family, I think that's the name, when they took over the Bears, they were worth $50. Now they're worth $5 billion because somebody started something small, invested in it, and grew it into something powerful. So by us being distracted by the sports, or not having the belief that we have the right to be owners, not even having that mindset, or also thinking that in order to be owners, I got to go buy something valuable. That to me is the wrong way to invest. You don't make money investing by buying expensive shit. If I want to own the house, you know, I don't necessarily make wealth by going to the most expensive neighborhood and buying a $10 million house and hoping the value goes up. That might work, but that's hard to do. It's hard to get in that neighborhood. What I do is I go to my hood where nobody wants to live. I do what Kenny Gamble did. Kenny Gamble did this in music industry. I go buy a raggedy ass house that nobody want for 80 grand. I fix that sucker up, and then it becomes that $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 house. So ultimately, I wish this was really part of the culture, man. I wish we would understand just how this thing works. And I know we don't, some of us just don't get it. And a lot of people don't believe me when I say it. You know, all I got is a PhD in this stuff. But I really think that if we shift our thinking, we can own incredibly valuable assets. like the way we used to own the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues were going into a big, powerful business until we sold all that out so Jackie Robinson could go get a damn job. Go ahead, Jonathan. I said too much.
So I hear your perspective. I think pulling it back to the ideal of mental health, going into the direction of the three components of mental health is, and this is just like a really, really high viewpoint, but you can get into the weeds of it: thinking, acting, thinking, feeling, and acting. So going to some of the things and recapturing one thing that you mentioned was this ideal of what you wish something would how things would move differently. And I think those things, in order for them to move differently, they have to be valued differently. And so I think that goes to a value system. And the other thing I think that it goes to is a trade-off system. Is if you had this item versus this item, which one would you rather have? And depending on how you view a thing, is how you treat a thing. So back to that ideal of I treat it this way because I viewed it this way. We then the behavior aspect of making what if you, Dr. Watkins, were given a plate of food, and on that plate of food you said there was spaghetti, there was corn, and then there was peas, and you were told to eat this plate of food. I can see and imagine Dr. Watkins, you saying, well, I'm gonna go back to the pantry and see if there's other things in there. But that's not, that comes from your approach to eating what was put in front of you. For some people, they say, I like spaghetti. Man, thank you for this spaghetti. And I'm going to eat the spaghetti with gratitude because that's what was put in front of me. And that's what I can identify with. So I think some of that also has to do with, and I'm pretty sure from an economic perspective, as you've gained more knowledge, you've been exposed to more things, and it has broadened your palette of understanding economics. I think that's the same thing that we can do, and I think that those who have been in these positions have a responsibility for. I can only talk from the perspective of a high school football coach who've experienced these things with players, or these things with families, these things with these things. That's my my horizon. Well, a person who's been in the CEO room, who's had the conversations about contracts and things like that, those are the people that should be sharing the information downward to create an ecosystem, something similar to what you're doing with the Black Business School, creating an ecosystem of sharing information. And through that, then you're exposing me to a different palette. What if I only know as an athlete that I can be a quarterback? Then I get into a system that exposes me to a different way of thinking. And when I go to college, instead of me just worried and focused on playing football, I also am building an alumni network. I'm also rubbing shoulders and shaking hands with individuals outside of the field to help broaden my ecosystem. So that exposes me to more opportunity. And I think that's where some of the conversation can talk about when we talk about connection and community.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. I think that exposure shifted my thinking. I mean, even after I had done all my doctoral work, I still wasn't seeing things the way I see things now. That was over 20 years ago. And in 25, 30 years ago, I knew a lot about finance, but now, you just have a whole different point of view. So here's what's interesting to me, man. And this is something I wish we could really address in the culture is I think sometimes we're trained to listen to the wrong people. I think that we have a lot of charismatic Black leaders who just, who are guiding people in the wrong direction, feeding them nonsense. I think that if you consider the fact that it doesn't matter, and a lot of times we want to put it all off on white folks and say, well, they keep information from us or they don't educate us well enough, things like that. But it's like, no, if you've got people that can see things in a different way and you're choosing to ignore that so you can go listen to a rapper, that's kind of on you to some extent. It doesn't mean that you weren't influenced, though, to believe that rappers possess all the wisdom in the Black community. But when I'm looking for Black leaders, I'm not looking at whatever Negro they put on TV. I'm looking for the husbands and fathers and mothers and sisters in the community that really know what's going on. I'm talking to guys like yourself who are talking to the kids and the parents and see what the community needs, because you're doing the work, right? You're interacting with people and you're improving their lives, and you really matter in terms of where the community is going. And I think that we get so many little distractions that get thrown out there, because there's nothing about anything that I'm saying that's really changed all that much. I've been saying this stuff publicly since the 90s, actually, since early 2000s, man. And there's some people who just say, oh, well, he's a professor, so I'm not going to listen to him because I can't relate to him, because only white people are supposed to be professors anyway. So he probably don't know what he's talking about. So I think that you're right, though. Exposure does matter. And here's the other thing that's interesting too. When you talk about us really gaining the power that we need to have to shape our own destiny, it doesn't really take everybody to do it. Like, millions of us don't have to all be on the same page. It just really takes people that have the capacity to lead and the power and influence to gain a little bit of courage. Strap some testicles onto your body and stop being so damn scared all the time, and really understand what this world is. I think the world is a competition. I think that the reason we lose the competition is because we don't even know we in the damn game. We don't even know there's a competition. We on the football field trying to make friends instead of taking hits and laying hits on other people. And so I think that for Black people, our quest to be accepted and to be liked and to be friends with everybody, I think that really hurts us, because I don't think they're trying to be our friend. I think they're basically like, look, you can be my slave. If you want to come and be my bitch, I'm gonna let you do that. But the minute you start bucking up on me and acting like you don't know your place, I'm gonna hurt you. Right? And because I've already got in your head and you've already committed to this white supremacy idea, because, like, think about it, from the time we're little, we're not educated by our own people. We get educated by other people's systems and all that. So I think that creates a fear, right? So when you look at, for example, you go look at an athlete that's worth $1 billion and he's got billionaire friends that are making lots of money. They showing up to the club and flexing and throwing money in the air and stuff like that. But you get them together and say, how do we step in and really compete with the world and develop industries that are going to really allow our people to prosper? I think they kind of shrivel up out of fear, because maybe that wasn't their education, that wasn't their exposure. And I get that, right? But the question is, when do we change that, right? Like, I personally think that every football coach in the country, not to tell anybody what to do, I was a track coach. I didn't coach football, I coached track. I think every coach that is responsible for young Black people should incorporate economic education into what they do on the field and help them learn from. There's some great models out here. Michael Jordan is an excellent model of how you can be an amazing athlete on the field, take that same skill set, translate that to things like business and ownership, and do extremely well, and learn those lessons, so that we understand that, look, just because you weren't that 1% or 0.1% that made it to the NFL, the NBA, yeah, you're part of the 99.9% that didn't make it. But your role is just as important as the guy or the woman that's actually on the court or on the field. Because maybe when they get out and they dunk the basketballs and score the points, you can pull together a group and you become the owners of a team that then allows you, like, so that you're buddies with LeBron. He's got 10 or 15 friends like Rich Paul and others who've elevated their careers in an extraordinary way because of LeBron's ability to play basketball. The next step to that would be, okay, now we're forming our own league. And LeBron is one of the athletes that's going to draw attention to this league, and we're going to do the back end infrastructure so everybody can get rich, right? Because like you said, and maybe you agree with me, I'd like to know what you think about this. I really think that we've got 95% of what they need in order for a sports league to be successful. What do you think?
I think, to your point, the big three is an example of what you're talking about, in my opinion. Ice Cube, not Ice Cube, gosh, I lost his name. Is Ice Cube?
Yeah, Ice Cube.
There we go. Ice Cube has the Big Three league that he started, I think maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, and now it's starting to produce. You're starting to see commercials, and you're starting to see all the marketing piece behind it. Now, I don't know enough of it, the back infrastructure, to say who's all involved or who all is, but I do know that there was buy-in from older NBA players who are not no longer in the NBA, but they still have a market for their talent. I do know that there was some buy-in from individuals that were saying, like stadiums that said, hey, we'll host the games and things of that sort. So All of those things, I think, is an example of what you're referring to as leveraging the know-how. It's leveraging the know-how. Knowledge is power when it's applied. Is not when knowledge sitting in your head and sitting in a book isn't powerful. It's when you apply it. So, like you said, as a person who deals in financing, you would want to see more educational connections to business and football from coaches. I'm in the same boat that I want to see it seen from teaching athletes that they're comprehensive people and not just products. That's the biggest thing that I want to see is helping them see that you are a part of this larger scheme that is happening, and you need to know what it is that you're playing, the role that you're playing. And to your point, you've dedicated over what I would say 40 years of your life to understanding financing. I'll assume. So one would say that you've been radical about financing. This is something you beat this drum on for 40 years. And so how has that looked different? What does the drumbeat look different like from year 1 to year 40, from year 5 to year 10 to year 15? What were some of the things that you've pivoted from? How were you able to use your experiences of working in financing to then help talk to different pockets and different people? I think that same thing can be applied when you're talking about comprehensive people in sports, and that we are whole human beings, athletes, parents, fathers, mothers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You mentioned Michael Jordan being a person that transitioned well from athletics. I think there are a number of people that have done that. I also say that this generation is promising because there have been some influencers that have used sports to elevate their platform to a point where they are now using skill sets that are generating income that are around sports. One of them is called an influencer called Acho Speed. My son is 11 years old and he watches this dude a lot. I can't remember another gentleman's name that he watches, but it's a few of them that like they have flag tournaments or they'll have one-on-one competitions, and then they'll generate 5 billion views and they somehow leverage that for income, sponsorships, things of that sort. All of that to say, I like the ideal of seeing how do we create, because that's something that we've been able to do in every stage of our existence is create. And it may have looked slower in some stages or not, but the Black Business School is a perfect example of creating in your sphere. So
I love
these
that.
athletes learn enough to create in their sphere because now they have the mindset of I'm not just an athlete. I'm using my athletic ability in this way, but how can I then still take that and what I call maybe leverage it to understand this game? And if I understand this game, I can play it this way. One of the gentlemen who works with investments, I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to get his information wrong. But I remember reading a story and saying how he was a dope boy, and he took the same principles of learning a dope game and put it into investing. And that's where I'm trying to me as I am learning my platform, as I'm learning how to get my message out there, is how do I encourage younger athletes and older athletes and link those athletes together and the people around athleticism and start having the conversation that you're having, Dr. Boyce, about economic education in athletics, about mental health in athletics, about all of the things that incorporate it. And instead of saying you tell us, we tell each other.
hmm Well, I love that, man. I love that a lot. And I think my wife went AWOL, so I don't know if she's coming back. But I'm gonna say this, man, and then I'll let you get the last word, and you can tell everybody where they can follow you. I agree with you 100%. I just kind of think the simple connection I would encourage everybody to make into if you want to have a takeaway that you want to share with your family, friends, stuff like that, or your kids. Help them understand that skill sets are universal. That's the biggest thing. If you got a hammer, that doesn't mean you can only hit one nail. It's better if you have a hammer, you shouldn't just necessarily focus on one nail to hit and then they take that nail away and you think your hammer is worthless. No, that hammer has value, even if it's not hitting the nail that you were hitting before. If you're a builder, then that hammer will always have value. So what I would say to everybody in here is if you look at how much we get from sports, like how many of y'all in here, give me a yes in the chat if you played sports or if you love sports or have been involved in sports. Everybody put a yes in the chat. Every athlete, former athlete, athlete in your mind, like every if you got a kid that's an athlete, put the yes in the chat. I ask you that because I want you to really tune in on what's universal about sports and what it does for you. Sports teaches you all the things you need to be successful in life. Sports teaches you how to plan ahead, how to have a strategy, teaches you how to work hard for your goals, teaches you consistency, teaches you discipline, right? Teamwork, all these things you learn from sports. And I guarantee you that if you are committed to the sport you play when you're young, then you can take that same skill set. You can apply it to becoming a medical doctor, an attorney. You can apply it to becoming a business owner. There's a billion things you can do with that ability. And it's not just what you do with your body; it's what you do with your mind. And this is one of the reasons why we have to educate our own kids, is so they don't get boxed in. Because when people get boxed in, they end up feeling like they don't have any options. It doesn't matter if you actually do or not. What matters is if somebody's convinced you that you have no options. Like a bad relationship. You ever had a bad relationship, Jonathan, where where that girl made you somehow think that she's the only girl that's ever gonna want you? I know it's hard to admit, but I've gone through that.
Hey, man, I'm not gonna admit that, man. No, I'm still.
I have, man. I have. Baby, please, and all that, and then she dumps you, and then you find out that there's a lot of opportunities out there. There's a lot of fish in the sea that you never saw because you were focused on the wrong fish. So a lot of our young men, I think, they focus on the wrong fish. They think basketball is the only thing I got. Well, really, you got a whole lot more than basketball. You were great at that. You can be great at a lot of things because it takes, success and excellence is kind of universal. And making sure you understand that is part of your self-esteem and realizing that you can't let somebody else ever take away your identity. No, never let anybody else have that right to take your identity away from you. That is your decision. So I'm gonna let you get the last word, Jonathan. Maybe you can tell people where they can find you, stuff like that.
Yeah. So I first off want to say thank you for just making a time for this conversation. I agree with several points that you made in the sense of understanding that skill sets are universal, and that's something that if you can understand as a football player, I use that as an example. If you can understand how timing works, where angles work, if you can understand that I have to kick the ball 40 yards, or you can start then having conversations about math. You can start having conversations about spatial awareness. You can start having conversations about how strategy works with people. Like one of the things I love doing for football players that I get an intimate relationship with as it relates to like coaching and things like that is teaching them a game of chess and how the game of chess correlates with the pieces on a field moving toward an expected end. I'll say it that way. And so being able to correlate different analogies for football players, for athletes, for volleyball players, and letting them know that this is how your sport can translate. This is how the skill sets that you've developed in this sport can translate. I think is a powerful thing. As it relates to my work specifically, we do that for athletes starting as early as seventh grade. We, as best as we can, that's the primary focus area is 7th through 12th grade. We work with athletes in the state of Texas, and we've done some things outside of the primary in the state of Texas. We work with athletes in helping them understand the foundational knowledge of mental health. What is emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making? What is executive functioning? What is that? What does that even mean? How do I even define what are the emotions that I'm experiencing? And how does that correlate to possibly past experiences like trauma? How does that correlate to things like attachment theory or emotional dysregulation, or in all of these different terms? We start giving them a voice and vocabulary to set the foundation of, okay, now that we're building this, when we get to this point, for example, well, we just had an athlete we worked with that went to a school in college and then ended up having to transfer to another school. And then throughout that transition, he and I talked about what it means to start something new. What is it? What are the feelings associated? What are the thoughts behind it? So all of those things are foundational pieces that are important to life, because just like you, Dr. Watkins, has said, you've had various transitions in life yourself. You've had very different seasons of life. So how do we keep athletes from being stuck in this mindset that I am only an athlete, I can only do this, and move them to a broader understanding of themselves so that they can show up fully comprehensive as a person? If I'm ever faced with a situation, going back to that movie, him, if I'm ever faced with a moral situation where I say, I don't want to do this, I'm okay walking away from the I don't want to do, because I don't want to compromise who I am outside of football, because football is not my identity. It's something I do. I think that's where we start having this conversation of separating the two. People can find me if they're interested in work and following our work. Facebook is at Jonathan Gaffney. I share my information with Dr. Alicia, so she can get that information out. On Instagram is at Coach the Mental, and then on Twitter is at Coach Mental Health. So you can find me on any of those outlets. You can email me, spelling my first name, last name at gmail.com. Really, man, I'm really about just doing the work on the ground and really doing the best that I can to get this message out.
All right. So everybody, take a look on that screen at how he spells his name. It's spelled a little different from the typical Jonathan. I bet a lot of people misspell your name every day, huh?
Oh man, blame my parents. I blame my parents. But no,
yeah, I love that though. Yeah, I bet you've never met another person whose name spelled the same way as yours, have you? Yeah, that's really unique. So Jonathan, for anybody that's listening, it's spelled John, just like John, Athane, almost like methane at the end, A-N-E. So Johnathane Gaffney, Gaffney. That's Johnathane, and his email is jonathan.gaffney, Gaffney, at gmail.com. All right. So I see some Bernita's asking me about the financial program for student athletes here in Philly. I think that's great. I think that at some point, my goal, my hope, my dream is that things like financial success, business success, life success programs like what Mr. Gaffney's running, that this is not the exception. This has to be the rule. Think about this. There's nothing harder in America right now, anyway, that I can see than growing up as a black man or black woman in this country. You got a lot of landmines, a lot of tough situations, a lot of crazy scenarios you got to navigate. So when he talked about executive functioning, you have to function like an executive, or they'll have you out here functioning like a prison inmate. And we don't want that. That's not who our kids are supposed to be. They're supposed to be in better situations. So that this emotional intelligence, absolutely essential. Executive functioning, absolutely essential. Good life decisions, absolutely essential. Being able to process your emotions properly in a healthy way, essential. Understanding business and investing, essential. Give me a yes if you agree. Let me know if you agree. I want to make sure we walk away with that by having more than just a good conversation. I want us to have a transformative moment where we all go home and understand our role in this process. We're teammates. Let's go make sure the team wins, and let's make sure the babies get what they need. So I want to say thank you, Mr. Gaffney, for everything you do, man. I think everything starts with love, and thank you everybody who joined us. We love you. We appreciate you. And tomorrow morning we get started again in class, 10 a.m. We do this 7 days a week. So if you want to join class with us to study our finances, you can text the word morning to the phone number 87948. So text morning to 87948. And tomorrow at noon, Dr. Alicia is going to do a financial therapy session in our Stock Market Investors Club, and she's going to go through financial healing that you want to consider if you want to be a good investor. So your trauma does not block you from your success. You can hurdle the trauma and get right to the money, get right to the power, get right to all the things that God had in store for you. So God bless you, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you again, Mr. Gaffney. It's great to see you, brother. All right, and I'll see you all soon. Take care now. Peace.